Today I'm going to walk through how I configure my VS Code environment for debugging in the web browser. So I have here a basic React application setup. My index, as you can see, it just starts with an app and renders the app component. But you can see I'm having an ESLint error here. In case you missed some of the other videos that I've done, I'd recommend going into the comments and seeing how I have configured both ESLint and Prettier in the previous videos. But if you haven't seen those, it's not too important. So I'm going to open up the problems. You can see here there's a parse error with import with the source type module on ESLint. This is an error because ESLint is set up just to process JavaScript files. I need to also configure ESLint to work with Babel because it currently doesn't understand the import syntax. And it won't understand a couple other things like the React, the JSX syntax. So I'm going to have to configure ESLint to also run through Babel. To do that, we're just going to say, I'm just going to add the parser ESLint here, and I'm going to npm install Babel ESLint. Okay, now that that's installed, I'm going to check back, and I can see that it's still complaining, but now it's complaining about no unused vars, and we can see clearly that React is obviously needed because I have JSX on the page, and the app itself is being used here. So this is just another issue with it with ESLint not knowing that we're within a React application. So what I'm going to do is there's a plugin for React. Recommend. Okay. Now if I save that, I'm going to go back into my terminal and I'm going to run my linter. I think I have a typo here. Let me try and fix that. And that's going to be complaining about me not having this plugin installed as a dev dependency. So I'm going to go ahead and install that now. And let's see if the linter will pass this time. It does pass. I'm going to open up my index file again, and all of my errors have gone away. So I'm just going to pop this open real quick just to see the scripts that I'm running. So you can see the npm run script that I was running here is just ESLint src. I also have configured just a basic Webpack dev server. This is to get my application online with hot module reloading. So I'm going to open up my, let's close this, I'm going to open up my Webpack config, and you can see I've added a section here. This is just some basic Webpack dev server stuff, nothing really magical in here. I always have the hot set to true, that turns on hot module reloading, and I also have open to true, so that's going to open up the browser automatically as soon as I run the application. So now I'm going to start the application. I do npm run. I'm going to see what options I have available. I'm going to use dev, npm run dev. And that's going to start my application. You can see I have a basic hello world and I have a time component. So I'm going to now open up my launch JSON. If you have nothing in here, that's okay. We walked through configuring this section to debug the Node application in another environment. For this application, we're not going to need to debug Node because everything here is going to be running in the server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add Configuration, and I'm going to select Chrome Launch. The difference between attach and launch is that attach assumes that you're going to start Chrome on your own, and then this VS Code instance is going to attach to the Chrome instance. I'm not going to be launching Chrome right now because you have to launch Chrome in debug mode, which just requires a little bit more setup. But if you configure Chrome launch, VS Code is going to handle all of that stuff for you. So it sets up this default here, which is actually all that we really need. The only things you really have to check is you have to make sure that when you're running your web server, this is the address that it's going to connect to. So I do have the address on my web server set to localhost 8080. So this is going to be more than enough. This is going to be configured perfectly. I don't have to make any changes here. So I'm going to save that. Always make sure that you're going to have multiple things started here. So I have to always start my server, my Webpack dev server has to be running. So I start that in the terminal, but I actually don't need to view the terminal right now. After I have my launch Chrome configuration, I'm going to go into the debug tab. I'm going to select launch Chrome. From there I can click play. I can also hit start debugging, but what I always do is I press F5 just because I'm constantly turning on and off debugging. So I'm going to press F5 and you can see that it launches an instance of Chrome. This is actually a debug instance of Chrome. The difference is that it has some ports open. It has the debugging ports open so that external applications can connect to it. And I'm going to open my Webpack config again, and all I have to do is specify that I'm going to use a dev tool. And I believe this is just called source map. So what this is going to do is that when the Webpack dev server is running, it's just going to add source maps into there, and all source maps is a link in between the Webpack output JS that you were looking at in the browser and my source in my editor. So if this is set up properly, I'm going to have to go in and actually just I'm going to have to restart my Webpack dev server. The reason you have to restart it is because it doesn't automatically pick up changes. The hot module reloading doesn't really apply to Webpack config. So anytime you make a change to your Webpack config, you're going to have to stop and start your web server. So I'm going to start a debug instance of this. And what I'm looking for here is this Webpack section here. It's got a couple of different directories, but what I'm looking for is the source directory here. So this should contain all of our source code. You can see here, this is the syntax I'm looking for. So this hasn't been run through Webpack. This hasn't been run through Babel because I'm looking at JSX, the raw JSX, and not the Babel transpiled JSX. So I can actually open up components. I can look in my app. I can look in my time. This is perfect, and I can set. I can pause the debugger within here, but what I really want to do is do that within VS Code. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Now that it seems like everything is set up, so now earlier I intentionally put a bug in here so we could debug this. I'm going to show just through the console logs what this bug's going to look like. So this function here is supposed to run every time this component is unloaded. That's just part of how the use effect works. So I'm just going to say the time component is unloaded. I'm going to start this up again. And if I look in my console, I should start seeing the time component being unloaded all the time, but it actually shouldn't be unloaded at all because within the application, time is just here and it never changes. So so there's no reason for this to be unloading. It's setting the interval every time and then unloading every time. So if I put another console log, start this up again, I can see here that the component is loading and unloading every single time. So that's that's definitely a bug. But we don't have to discover that with console logs. I can actually set a breakpoint in here, and if I hit F5, I can actually see my breakpoint getting hit. So here I am, clear interval. Not sure why that's happening. I'll hit continue, and you can see it just immediately keeps clearing my interval. So that's disconcerting. I can set another breakpoint on set interval, and you can see that both set interval and clear interval are both getting hit. So I'm going to go ahead and pause that. I'm going to turn my breakpoints off, and if I look at use effect, I can see that it just has one argument, which is the function, which means that it's going to run every single time. So to get it to run just on startup, I just have to add that. So that seems like that was the bug we were encountering. So I'm going to go ahead and put my breakpoints back. I'm going to run this again. And here's our set interval being set. I'm going to hit play. And it looks like the time is time's incrementing correctly, and we're not getting our clear interval. Actually, in this application, it'll never be. The clear interval will never be hit. So okay, that's perfect. So we're going to get rid of that, and then some things that we can do while debugging, just to make sure that everything is working. I always like to make sure that the breakpoints actually stop where they're supposed to. Sometimes the breakpoints can be a little bit off. And that shouldn't happen if you have your Babel RC file set up properly and you're using source maps. That's really going to be the key, is that source maps have to be turned on and properly enabled. So I'm going to run this again. I'm going to try and stop on that set time. So it is stopping. I'm going to go ahead and open up the local window, but I want to look at what this value is here. So one nice thing with the debugger is that I can just put a watch expression in there and see what the value is every time. So this will make things a lot easier to debug. So getting this set up in VS Code is pretty simple. It's one of the first things I always do, and I always try and debug using the VS Code debugger as opposed to using console.logs. It's going to save me just a lot of time if I take a couple extra minutes just to set this up at the beginning of the project. If you're curious about how to set up other environments for debugging, I have other videos that are linked in the comments on how to debug in a Node environment, also how to set up your debugger for Jest, because setting it up to debug your unit tests in Jest takes a little bit of extra configuration. Anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you like it, share it with your friends and coworkers. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @JoelNet. You can also search for JavaScript Joel. Anyways, thanks for watching. Bye.